everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Marketing Inc. I have an awesome guest for you today, Mr. Tanner Chidester. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
So for those of you who are maybe not familiar with Tanner, why don't you give us a rundown of who you are, what you do, and bring us up to this point in your life and business?
Sure. So I came from a family of 7 kids. My mom was stay-at-home, as you can imagine, with a bunch of hellions. My dad was a teacher and grew up in a very conservative household. No one in my family had ever had a business or started a business. I don't even know anyone as far back as I can remember. So grew up, got bullied a lot as a kid, got very into sports because of it. Because when I excelled in sports, I noticed people didn't mess with me. Took that very seriously till I was almost 22. And so I played some Division I football, tried to go to the NFL, didn't work out. And then at 22, I had a mentor who had lunch with me and said, "What do you want to do with your life?" And I wasn't really sure because after football, I didn't feel the same drive to continue going to engineering school. So he convinced me to drop out. I moved back to my parents' house and I worked out of his garage while I did some side hustles for 2 years. And I didn't make any money, but he taught me a ton of things that would later on become very influential in my life, where I learned how to build a product A to Z and how funnels worked and back-end automations and all these things that a lot of people take for granted. And then around 25, I was getting a little antsy. I felt, hey, I'm 25 years old. I'm living at home with my parents. Like, what is going on? And I moved out and I was doing door-to-door sales and I was getting pretty frustrated. I was like this close to going back to school when I saw an ad on Facebook that said how to start an online fitness business. So this was probably 6 years ago. And I clicked on the ad. I went through, got high ticket sold. So anyone who's not familiar with high ticket, just high price stuff. I had $2,000 to my name, spent it all, had to get the rest on a credit card. And then I went in the program, and the big shift for me was that instead of charging low ticket, so I was charging a $47 fitness program at the time, I went to a high ticket and I made $10K in a week. And then I moved back home because I said, hey, I'm figuring it out. I want to save as much money as I can. I paid my parents a little bit of rent. And then I put my head down, didn't come out of the room. I did $1 million that year. Because I did so well, I got some ClickFunnels awards. And, trainers were like, hey, I saw you got this and you have a fitness business and all this. Can you show me? And at first I resisted, but eventually I did it. And then we did 10 million that year. That was the craziest year of my life, just going 1 to 10. It was insane. And then that's when Elite CEOs formed, which is on my hat now, because we started helping people outside of the fitness industry. So we still have a ton of fitness clients. I'd say at least 50%. We still get a tremendous amount of volume. But then we started helping other people who needed the same skills in marketing, but weren't in fitness. And then that continued to grow. And then around January 1st this year, I stepped out of my company as acting CEO. I'm just basically an advisor at this point. And then I own 4 other portfolios or companies that I'm a majority stakeholder. And they do different types of stuff around sales. And we have an ad agency and stuff like that. Now I'm traveling the world. So that's why I'm in Costa Rica and I got stem cells. I don't know if you can tell on the screen, but that's why my neck and my face is all jacked up because I was getting stem cells in my face.
Yeah, no, I love it. But lots that you just shared there. A couple of things. You mentioned that you weren't making very much money initially, and you were selling this low ticket product, and you shifted over finally to that higher ticket model. And that one change, which I'm sure it's a lot more than just one tiny change, but that one change allowed you to make your first million. And so I want to dive into that a little bit more. First and foremost, why did you believe that lower ticket model was what you wanted to do or what you needed to do? And how did that shift really occur from, okay, I'm going to sell high ticket, you made that decision, and then all of a sudden you have this 7-figure per year business? Kind of walk me through the actual changes that you implemented and how you went so far so quickly.
Yeah, great question. So to be honest with you, I think a lot of it is just societal pressure, what people say. Other people are charging $50 a session. So I felt, hey, $50 is what I can charge. The way I was trying to sell, just not very efficient because I'm sitting on a computer messaging people, but I can't really get on a call. I also don't want to take too much time because it's only $50. So I have to sell a ton. I didn't have a big following. So really the big shift was I read a lot of Russell Brunson's books and he talks about the ascension funnel and it can work. But I think the key thing he leaves out and a lot of beginners forget is that's usually if you have a back end and you can set all those things up. There's a lot of stuff that goes into setting up all these funnels and Ascension and carts and payment checkouts. Really all that happened is I went from trying to sell in the DM. I sold maybe $2,000 worth in 2 years. Like, it was abysmal. It was terrible. And I was working 16 hours a day, 8 hours at a real job, and I do 8 hours on my business and plus maybe the gym. So I didn't have a life, and it's tough when you're sacrificing everything and you're making nothing. So that's why I almost quit multiple times, but I stuck with it. And the shift was, they just told me, hey, charge more. And I was like, no one's going to buy that. No one's going to buy that. That's crazy. $1,500 for 3 months. That's crazy. And they're like, dude, yeah, they will. Just get them on the phone and sell it. I was like, all right. So I did that. I started messaging people to get on a call. I'd done door-to-door sales. So I'll be straight up, like, that obviously makes me way better at sales than the average person, because I spent 9 months knocking on doors 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. Hardest thing you could possibly do. It was harder than building the company I have now. It was that hard, and got good at that. So when I started messaging people, that process was really smooth. I got them on a phone call. I usually would do a triage call because it was a cold message. So I had to do a little bit more rapport. And then I started selling them on the phone. I made 10K in that week. And then I just pushed on the gas. And so every single day, all day, I was just messaging, doing phone calls. I didn't date for probably, between when I didn't make money and I started like making a little bit, I'd probably say 5 years. I didn't really like date. I didn't go out. I didn't drink. I didn't party. So I can go into as much detail as you want, but I sacrificed quite a bit back then to get to where I was at.
Yeah, it obviously paid off. I think that is what most people want to forget about entrepreneurship, is that something does have to be sacrificed. And the question is, are you willing to sacrifice a lot in a relatively short period of time, or a little, but have it take a lot of additional years potentially to make that happen? So it obviously worked out well for you. So let's talk a little bit about the DM side of what you were doing, because that is something that obviously is still very applicable today. But I think a lot of business owners still do not understand what a cold DM strategy should look like. It feels really spammy to them. They worry that they're just going to turn people off. Obviously, you had
Yeah.
that figured out. I know you said that it was really your price point that was the big issue, because truthfully, selling $2,000 worth of a $47 product, you made a decent amount of sales. It just was such a small price point that it didn't really materialize into revenue. But how were you finding people to message? What was it that you were saying to them? Just talk me through some of those conversations and how you ended up getting them on the call. And then we'll talk a little bit more about how those calls went afterwards.
So when I first started this, I was selling fitness. The first thing I did is I went through all my followers, like every single follower I had on social media, every single person who ever liked or commented anything. That was where I started. And I made a bunch of money there just to start, because a lot of these people were following me because I was posting fitness content, but I just didn't know how to monetize it. So once I started a combo, it was shocking to me how many people were willing to get on calls and talk to me, but they were never going to reach out first. And that was really mind blowing for me, because I thought, oh, if they're interested, they'll reach out, which is what most people think how business works. But the reality is you usually have to work the lead. So I started there, and those were probably more considered warm, right? So once I ran out of those, that's when I went more the cold route. So the way that I did it specifically, so you can do Facebook or Instagram, but I liked Instagram. And the reason I liked it was I would go to hashtags and I would do anything around a keyword for what you're trying to sell. So for me, it was fit mom, fit dad, fit spo, fitness, like anything like that. And I also liked it because they're less likely to be hit up, because Facebook groups, everyone knows that. Go in the group, you start messaging people. So they get hit up a lot more. On Instagram, if I go to a random hashtag with 23 million posts, the chances that you and someone else have both hit that person, very low. So I really like that. And then I'd always reach out and I'd start with something to relate to. If it was a mom, for example, I'd say, hey, I hope this isn't weird to say, but you have 3 beautiful kids. I'm from a family of 7, so I just love kids. Just wanted to give you that compliment. LOL. And put in whatever you need to make it not sound as weird as possible. And they'd be like, oh yeah, thank you so much. I love my kids. And then I would have my script, and this is how the script would go. And I would say, yeah, got it. So do you just work or do you stay at home? I think either way, it's amazing. Just curious. And they're like, oh, I work. And I say, yeah. So what do you do for work? Does it keep you busy? And every single person says yes, because no one's going to say I'm lazy. And so once they would say yes, I say, got it. Does that make it hard to work out? I know a lot of times when I was working X amount of hours, it made it hard too. And that was really my pivot. And if it's a business question, usually if it's business, it's a little bit more direct. And that's where I could go into that as well. But for this, it worked great. And like, yeah, like it actually does. And then what I would do next is it's still conversational, but I'm like, cool. So what are your goals? What are you struggling with? What have you tried? Have you ever had a coach? And then once they gave me that, I'd say, hey, look, I don't know if you care or not, but I do this fitness stuff all day long. If you, I can give you some suggestions, but obviously I'd like to ask because like you didn't really reach out to me. LOL. Right. And they're like, oh my gosh, that'd be great. And I go, awesome. Instead of typing out another 300 messages, LOL, I can just get on a call with you real quick. Here's my number. What's yours? They'll take 10 minutes or less. And then what will happen is either A, they won't respond. And then you just are like, or they won't want to get on. You're like, hey, I'll be honest. I'd love to help. I just want to be a little more efficient with my time. So I'm happy to help, but just if we can get on. Or B, they would get on. And then once they were on the call, it was just about building rapport. So really my 10-minute calls, you'd laugh because I asked the same questions really. I was like, okay, so just to clarify, and that was what you're struggling with. And this is what you tried. And this is your coach. And then at the end, what I would say is go, okay, cool. So what I'd like to do next is there's going to be some specific questions that I need you to answer that, like what you want to eat, foods you dislike, foods you hate, stuff like that. That's going to take a little bit more time. I'm not going to remember because I'm busy. And so I'll send you that email. And then once you do that email, we'll hop back on and we'll set a plan in motion. And everyone says yes. We're like, oh yeah, sounds great. And then I'd send an email, and in the email, I'd have 10 questions. It was like age, height, weight, whatever. But the 2 questions I cared about as I phrased it, it was like, hey, if I can show you a path that works 100% while eating the foods you love and working out in the way you want, are you willing to invest in yourself? And I would always talk to them on the phone, get an idea if they have money. So if they didn't have a lot, I'd say, I know you don't have a lot of money, but if we can work something out, will you invest? Like in parentheses. And then the other question was on a scale 1 to 10, like how serious are you? And then I'd be like, wink, I need you to say a 10. And then if they didn't reply, I'd reach out, hey, I saw these questions, and work through it. If they did, I reach out and I'd set the call, and I would close that way. I don't remember my numbers exactly, but I would close between 3 to 5 deals a week on average organically. But it was a lot of work. I was working all day because it took a little bit longer of a cycle as I'd reach out. They have to respond. Then we have the first call. Then I have to wait for the email. It would take a little longer. But once I had that process down and I started running ads, it was a joke because ads, they would just be like, I'm interested. And I could just go right into the pitch.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think at the end of the day, it's so simple. And you're right. People on Facebook, in Facebook groups, they are a little oversaturated. I would assume, I know I get hit up with cold DMs on the regular. People typically are not starting off the way that you just mentioned, though. That's the difference. You see, everybody uses the same script, but it's not a good script. They're going straight for something that with no rapport building, or they're saying, hey, how are you? And they're expecting you to hold the whole conversation. So I love how you said you opened it up with the compliment. You took time to actually look at their profile, see if this was the ideal client for you, and you made it personal to them. So I think that all makes sense. You said once you added on your paid ads, you were really taking this strategy, but pouring gasoline on the fire. What type of ad strategy were you running? Were you doing a messenger automation? Were you just running ads directly to Messenger and doing that still in a more manual fashion? What was the back end side of that ad strategy? And what was the offer that you were running in the ads as well?
Yeah. So I first was running everything straight to page because that's what 99% of people do. And if you can get that to work, more power to you. Like, I think that is optimal. It's easier to scale. There's less hands touching the cookie, so to speak. But for me, I never got that to work. So I actually hired 4 other coaches in a row that I was trying to get ads to work and I couldn't. And it was probably 50 to 70K. So I was just I was making all this money organically and then just burning through it. And I was getting really frustrated. Around this time, ManyChat came out. It's probably been out. It's not as necessary as it was. But back then, people who don't remember is Facebook didn't have a native way to do that yet. So ManyChat would be the gap where you'd put the link in your ad and it would open up a messenger conversation. It came out and I don't know what I was thinking. I was pretty desperate. I was like, I'll just try this thing and see if it works. And it didn't work at first because I was, click, hope that they watched my video and book a call. And then one day I got really pissed. And I actually, the coach I had hired at the time had this huge heated argument where I was just like, man, you said this would be different. And I've hired 4 other coaches. But he pissed me off and called me out. So I said, all right, screw this. And I went and I started messaging every single lead manually. And I made 6 sales at 3K a pop, and I made 18K in a week. And that was the aha moment where I was like, holy shit. Like, I just figured this thing out. And then I just kept that system going where the leads would come in, I would reach out. Like, I'd wait, like they booked automatically, awesome, but I'd reach out after maybe 5-10 minutes, and I would just do that process, and it just worked like magic. And I couldn't believe it. And it blew my mind at the time. And that's what I've written for the last 5 years. So we still try stuff straight to page, but I only have one of my companies that predominantly goes straight to page. All my other companies actually do far better doing Messenger. And we've just tested it. And I just think it's the fact that because there's so much distrust, there's so many competitors, there's so much stuff they've seen, that it's really hard without a genuine conversation to kind of get over a lot of the doubt or the like distrust, I guess you could say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when you say going straight to page, just to clarify for anybody listening, do you mean landing page or profile page? Landing page, correct?
Yeah, landing page, correct. Most people, when they click an ad, they'll click and then it goes to a sales page or an opt-in page. And that's what I mean. For me, ours would open in Messenger, and then the first button would be to that next page. And so if they went through and booked, great. But if they didn't, then we had that opportunity to, hey, we can go in and message them. And that's just what really worked well for me.
Yeah. So when it comes to those follow-up messages, originally you were the person that was doing that. You were really able to have that human one-to-one conversation. Obviously, somebody within your organization is doing that at this point. So how did they approach it? Are they approaching it as if they are you, or are they approaching it as if they are just somebody on your team who wants to get more info? Tell me what that current Messenger follow-up strategy looks like.
So when I first started doing it, obviously I was doing it 100%. As you scale, you have to make the decision if you want people to say, hey, this is XYZ's team. And I think it depends at scale. So for example, if it's Tony Robbins, most people are not going to believe Tony Robbins is messaging him, right? So I wouldn't really go that route. If you're smaller, people can, but it just comes down to you, because some people, they don't feel comfortable. They say, oh, I don't want people to think I'm messaging them XYZ, but you're going to get better results. And so that's just a question of what you want to do. It comes down to that. But typically for my companies, whoever the leading face is, because we have multiple, the message is coming from them. And we haven't seen a huge uptick in going and saying, hey, like, this isn't actually Kyle, this is actually John. It doesn't seem to help. And then a lot of the conversations go nowhere.
Yeah.
So typically whoever the face of the brand is, that's who's doing it. And that's what I'd recommend, because just talking strictly to dollars, once they get in the program and stuff, 9 times out of 10, they know I wasn't talking to them, or they know, hey, Tanner, sometimes I will, sometimes I'm on my phone, but sometimes I'm not. And they know. I just try to look at the data, and that's where I came from, because I was poor. And so I don't know if someone would agree with that, but for me, I'm just, hey, I'm poor. Just make more money to do it this way. And that's the way I like to do it.
Yeah, no, very interesting. Okay, so how are those conversations starting off? The ad is talking about the offer directly, is that right? Or is there a gated content offer? Or kind of talk me through what that initial offer is, and then how that follow-up conversation might go if they don't self-schedule.
We actually have a whole SOP for our teams, but for me, what would happen is they would click an ad. The first link fires. It's, here's your training on XYZ. So they click that link and they go to the VSL or the opt-in page. Some people, you could do either, because you can sometimes grab, not to confuse people, but you could sometimes get their information inside Messenger and it can scrape with Zapier. So you can like pull that data over to your email system, or you can send them to a landing page. So it's up to you. But once we get that data, we'll usually just go in and say, hey, thanks for checking out the training. What's your goal? And we can just be very direct, because whatever they're clicking on is either about fitness, it's about building a business, it's about sales teams, whatever it is. And then from there, you're just qualifying. So you're like, oh yeah, like I'm trying to do this. It's okay, awesome. What's your goal? What's your struggle? What have you tried before? Have you ever had a coach? And then if there's anything they say that's a limiting belief or an objection, they're like, I'm not really struggling, but I just was clicking on the ads. Oh, okay. I'm curious to hear why you say that. Or what's your goal for the year? I'm at 200K. Okay. Are you at 200K yet? No. Okay. So why are you not struggling? You got to get them to feel and go through a combo that gets them to think or feel that they need and then you just push that to a phone call. So I could do a whole like week training on all kinds of situations and scenarios in Messenger, because it is a little bit like a sales call. You can't oh, it's going to go this way every single time and they're going to respond the same way. But the goal is that you
Mhm.
find out what that need is, you build a solution, and then you're like, hey, look, if you're open to it, we can book a call. Once they book a call, they'll fill out an application. And then if it's good, we send them homework videos like, hey, great, watch these before the call, blah, blah, blah. If they don't, we reach back out and say, hey, we saw in the application that we only have $3 to invest. Is that accurate? Because we're not going to set them up with our sales team if they're not able to buy. And when I first started my
Yeah.
business, I felt bad for that because I have people like cuss me out. But I realized, I said, hey, if you can't buy, you're just taking up time of my day that I can spend with people who can buy. And that obviously is more efficient.
Yeah.
That's really the process. It's not overly complex, but I think the thing that is complex, Allie, is when you're getting thousands of DMs a day, is making sure nothing gets missed. Everyone's followed up with, right? Because if someone leaves you on red, you want to go back later, follow up, flagging comments, not forgetting. That's actually the hardest part. But what you're going to find is the things that are harder to scale, it's harder for people to replicate. And so it gives you that edge because everyone can scale straight to page, like to some degree,
Yeah.
if their offer
Mhm.
works. But building like a, what I call a messenger team, if you have 12, 15 people, that's very hard because quality assurance is difficult. And these people have to be somewhat, they're sales reps essentially, but they're not paid as well because they're working more hours and it's a little like you have a bigger team, you can't pay them 10% of a sale.
Yeah. No, I think that makes perfect sense. So let's talk about how you are managing that. The software applications that might make that easier, or are you doing that natively inside of Facebook and Instagram and you have your own manual internal process of how you address that? And then I want to talk about building out that messenger sales team, what that looks like, any additional resources that people may be able to benefit from if they're thinking about doing something similar.
Sure. So luckily I pulled myself out of that process probably after I had 4 and then I made a manager and then the manager takes over that process. So I've been completely removed from that for probably 2.5, 3 years. But the way we usually do it is it's a mix between Facebook and Instagram, wherever the DMs are going. 3 years ago, we were doing $500,000 a month just to Facebook. Now we don't do any to Facebook and we only do Instagram. I can't tell you why, but like the quality just changed and it's just the nature of the beast. So we'll usually have 2 people in at the same time. So one person is starting conversations. So anyone who likes comments or like maybe they replied to the ad, but we need to start the convo. And then we have someone at the bottom who's literally replying. Now, this depends on volume. When you start, that's not necessary, but we usually have 2 people in there at the same time. We have used, I can't think of the word right now, but it's basically, what do you call it? It masks the location, right? Because the big issue when you have all these people logging into
VPN.
inboxes is sometimes space. Exactly. Thank you. The VPN, Facebook can lock you out. Instagram can lock you out. So we try to stay in there as much as we can because what we have found is if you use something like Go High Level, which can connect to your social medias, sometimes it doesn't load as fast or it's not up to date. So you don't see all the correct stuff, but we try to stay in there as natively as possible. And we use VPNs. We can use Business Manager or Business Suite, right? But what the team has said, typically if they're in there, it's better because it loads faster. They can see stuff. In the other ones, it doesn't.
Yeah.
But it's whatever you got to make it work. In terms of shifts and stuff, we just set it so that there's all the shifts are, you have 2 people on at a time, and then they have usually a 6-hour shift. And then those people get off and then someone else gets on. People do night times. We don't. A lot of people who are obviously in the US, they're not on at night. So there's no point.
Yeah.
I think it's just like running a big sales team. You just have shifts for everyone. You have an SOP. Every day you're training on different objections and things that they said. Hey, this was the wrong thing to say. The big thing is the managers, just the amount of quality assurance and going through and opening messages and trying to catch stuff because like I said, you're just pushing a lot of volume. Like I said, if you can run it straight to a page and just have a phone sales team that does it, I would probably say that's probably better. But for us, it depends on the offer. Just some offers are a little harder to sell or there's more competition. I find this works the best. Offers that are easier to sell or less competition, you can usually go straight to a page or just have them book on a webinar. That's been my experience, at least.
Yeah, I think the truth is there's more than one way to skin a cat, as they say. And I think it can be good to have a mix of things. So interestingly enough, most of what we do is phone sales. But I just started talking to people last week about bringing on like a messenger side of the sales team. I think it just makes sense because anybody who is running ads, even if they are going directly to a landing page, you're still getting comments. You're still getting people that are engaging with you. You're still getting people that are messaging you. I know that happens to us. And truthfully, they tend to be, we try and get to them as quickly as we can. But the people that are typically responding to those, at least the comments, they're not salespeople. They're not people who are really trained on how do I take this person, get them into a real DM conversation so we can try and move that process forward, even if they would ultimately close
Yeah.
on the phone. So I totally see the benefit in that. And I think it's one of those things that maybe people just write off as something that is either just something you do when you're just starting out and you don't have money to run paid ads, or you're going to be sending people DMs. But obviously, these are real people on the other side. They're really trying to have a conversation with you about whatever their problem is. And I think based on what we've seen through text message versus phone call, people will volunteer a lot of information through text message, and it can just be done at their own pace sometimes, and they're just a little bit more comfortable with it. So I think that's very interesting. So when you first started removing yourself from this process, you brought on this first person to help you with that. What did that process look like? Did you find this person on your own? Did you go through a company? How did that happen?
Yeah. So I found, man, I've trained so many people. It's crazy. So this was about 3 years ago, but I found them. And what I really did is I just would do quality assurance every day. So the way I usually train is I start off, obviously the interview, making sure they're the right culture fit, all this type of stuff. That's before. Once they're on board, I have them watch me for usually 3 days to 7 days. Usually 3 days is enough. Then I get on and I watch them. And then after that, I would just, every time after they worked, I would check. So I'd say, hey, log on, do your work, tell me when you're done. And then I would go through all the messages and we go through that. And then obviously if they improved, I'd keep them. If they didn't, like, hey, you got to go, like you don't have this down. So eventually once I found a stud and I trusted her, and every time I would check for work, it was perfect or it was close to perfect. I was like, okay, she gets it. I started having her build out the team. And depending on how much your offer is, if you're selling a lower price offer, $1,500, $3,000, you got to try to find people who are 8, 10, $12, but the quality of them is lower. What I found is that to get the highest quality people, if you're talking to US based business owners and they're a little bit affluent to how marketing works, what's happening, you got to get hired towards 18 an hour. That it's really tough from what I found to get someone quality who's not making at least 3 to 4K a month full time. So obviously, if you have a big team, you got to be making a lot. But that's really all I did. And then I just have them repeat that process. And then obviously the managers we have now, that's their full-time job. They're just constantly checking and revising and looking at the messages, making sure people are up to KPIs. The KPIs we set typically are about 0.5 apps per hour. So if they work for an hour, or 2 hours, they need to get at least one application, right? So one phone call. But it was really no more complex than that. And then to be honest with you, the script I came up with, it just came from me just naturally being good at it. And then with the team, we had to have it a little bit more concrete. So we have a whole objection list with, hey, when they say this, do this. But a lot of it's just like learning about the CEO and the offer. Like the more that they understand the customer and the more they understand marketing and coaching in general, the easier it is. And I think that's why as a CEO, you should always outperform your team, because you just understand the offer better. Like you understand sales better. You understand the customer better. So it's not going to ever be 100%. I'd say you got to be happy with 80% as good as you. But obviously that's the only way to get them.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. The big thing that I think a lot of business owners who are maybe trying to bring on people like this, they do believe that hiring out to a company that maybe already does this could make their lives easier. Obviously, the process that you laid out for training is time intensive. You have to invest in the people that are working for you and with you if you want them to really thrive. A lot of people would say, man, that's a lot of time. It's a time I don't have. Is there somebody that is already doing this that can just come in and do it for me? Have you tried outsourcing this to other companies? And if so, what's your experience been?
If you're outsourcing, so outsourcing to me typically is someone else owns the messengers or the setters, like it's their workers, and then they supply them to you. I usually find that doesn't work because unless it's all the same offer or they pay them well. So what usually happens with outsourcing is they get very cheap VAs, Philippines, Trinidad, whatever. Nothing wrong with that. But the problem is they're not very fluent in the English language. And so they make little errors where it's like, how is you today? And it's like, wait, how is you today? There's little things they mess up on. And then they just
Yeah.
usually the quality is just terrible. Like it's just not good enough. And so if you're going to do it, I usually would go a recruiter route where it's actually someone who hires for your team. So they only work for you. And then
Mhm.
again, like if you want someone to think, you have to pay more. If you just want someone who's a button pusher, does whatever you say, that's fine. But the problem I run into with most business owners is they don't know how to do it. They don't want to do it. And then they hire someone who is less skilled than them, who has no clue how to do it. And then they want them to just look at a couple examples and figure it out.
Yeah.
What do you expect? That's just not going to happen. Well, I think you have to really, with a service-based offer, if you're not willing to put time in to learn the skills and train your team, good luck, because you're not a billion-dollar VC-backed company where you can just go hire a messenger for $10K a month and burn through $2 million of cash. So that's been my experience. I'm not a huge fan of outsourcing, but if you're going to get like an in-house person, we've definitely done that. It's usually very well worth it.
Yeah, no, I think that makes total sense. And you're right. It actually is a relatively challenging role in some ways. Like they have to be able to think on their feet. They have to be able to go with the natural flow of the conversation. There's a lot of decisions to be made just in the moment. I do think that makes total sense. Talk about how you shifted from the fitness space to what it is you're doing now. Obviously, you started off like you told us, you started building that offer. That was health coaching, fitness coaching, and then talk about what you're doing today and how that pivot took place.
Yeah, I never in my wildest dreams thought I'd be a business coach. I actually would talk mad shit about business coaches. Because when I started
Yeah.
out, I just felt I was top 1%. And I felt, man, I was going to be successful no matter what. And because almost every program I went in, I was the top client. Like I would post the biggest numbers.
Yeah.
I'd have the most sales. I was in the most shit. And part of it was, I think the truth is in the middle. I think without those things, regardless of how good or bad I say it was, I probably wouldn't have gone there. On the other hand, I do think I'm unnatural. I think I do a lot of things very well that most beginners don't. And that's the big difference, right? Because if you give everyone the same program, what's the difference with the results? It's the person, 100%, right? And
Yeah.
their implementation. But yeah, I was building a fitness company. It got to, I want to say is 150,000 a month. And then I had all these trainers asking for help. And at first I said no, because I said, yeah, F business coaches. I don't want to be with those guys. F them. Da, da, da. And then I had all these trainers ask for help, but I had a waiting list of about 15 people who wanted to pay me 10K. And I was 25 years old and I'm going, that's a lot of money. So I started that company. And then
Mhm.
within 3 months, it crossed 1 million sales. So I now had this decision of I'm running two companies at the same time. This one is doing double the revenue like instantly. This one still does well, but now I'm pulling my employees. I'm split part-time. So I made the decision at the time. I don't know if it was the right decision, but I said, hey, I'm going to shut down the fitness one. I'm going to keep this going. And then that's when we exploded and we did literally over 10 million that year. It was just insane. And then that's when the next year I said, oh, if I do fitness trainers and I can make this much, then I should start doing general business. And so that's what turned into Elite COs, which in hindsight, I don't know if that was the right move or not. It's hard to say, but I'm grateful for it because I've learned a lot. And so I think these last 5-6 years, I've learned a tremendous amount about business and sales and marketing and offers. And so whatever I do next, I think is going to go tremendously better. But yeah, so that's how it came about. And then after that happened, I started building divisions in my companies where now that I knew how to build a business, I started hiring CEO down. And so now I have four other companies where I have different CEOs run them. One is a sales and training company, so sales, training, and placement. One is an ad agency. One is a kind of tech. And then the other one is actually done with you wealth system around day trading. And so you probably wouldn't know their mind unless like I said something, but that's been cool as
Yeah.
well as to build a team. One, it's harder. You have to give up margin a little bit because these CEOs want to make 15, 20, 25 grand a month and they're doing all the
Mhm.
work to start. So you have to eat it. But eventually, once they get it to 200-300K, you're not doing a single thing and you're still collecting checks. And that's been cool to see as well.
Yeah, definitely. A lot to break down there, but I think it does make sense that you shut down the fitness business. Maybe like looking back now that you are hiring CEOs for these different companies and building them that way, you always could have hired somebody else to run that business. But with people wanting to pay you that much money to help them do what you did, I think it's just a natural fit. I did feel the same way about business coaches when I started as a business owner. I just thought it was like a bunch of 20-year-olds who'd done nothing before telling everybody like how to make this money. So there is definitely this negative connotation that comes with it. But I do think that if people are offering to give you money to help them, it's a great compliment in and of itself. But I do think that it means that you've done something well on your own. So you went from 1 million in your first couple of months of that business to 10 million. So obviously the first business going from $2,000 a year to 1 million was huge, but now a 10 time acceleration of 1 to 10, what did you have to focus on in that time period to prevent things from just falling apart, or did they fall apart? What did that year actually look like for you?
Yeah, so there's a mix. The first thing is at that time, I was I still am to a degree, but I was very abrasive. So I was very much get the fuck what you need done or leave. I don't care how you feel. I don't care if you're sick. It was just very abrasive culture where I just said, this is my goal and you better hop on the damn ship or get off. I don't know if that was the best way to do it, but I did get results because I put the fear of God in people, so to speak. And it was just
Yeah.
scaling dramatically fast. So that every month I was like jacking up the ad spend like 50K. I was hiring. I was on sales call. Most of it was sales calls because at that point you're pretty much either on sales calls or you're managing all day. So most of my day was hiring, training, managing. I would take maybe overflow sales calls, but it was really just getting the team to perform. And I don't know if you remember, but I just think it was all a mix because ManyChat was new to the space. I think I was one of the first ones to really scale Messenger that big. I don't think anyone was really doing it. 2 years later, everyone's doing it, right? So you usually have this 2 year
Mhm.
window. And so I hit that window right at the same time. COVID was like coming or getting ready to come. And so it was toward the end of that year, but that's when COVID was starting to happen and stuff as well. And yeah, I don't think there was anything crazy I just didn't do anything though, to be honest with you. So when someone's like, what did that year look like? I was extremely stressed. I was extremely fatigued. I had no social life. I didn't talk to friends. I barely talked to my family. But I don't know how to describe it. At the time, I didn't care about anything else. It was just
Yeah.
a lot of time with the team and hiring and training. But I think we lucked out because at the time, we were doing a very unique marketing. It didn't seem unique, but at scale, there was really no one competing with us. And there
Yeah.
weren't a lot of competition in the fitness space, right? There's a lot of business coaches, but very few that build a fitness company. So I think it was just
Yeah.
all the right storm at the right time. And then it did slow down, right? The next year, like I can't keep 10xing the business. We did 15 million adding the general business side. But yeah, 10 million in a year was insane. And it was a fun ride, but it was like, I don't want to relive that ever again. It was very detrimental to my health. I should say that.
Yeah, no, I can only imagine it's a lot for anybody to put on themselves. And at the same time, I think that even when you really love growing a business and building something and pushing yourself to the next level, you have to have something that's for yourself. You have to have those relationships and those people around you. I think it does definitely take so much more from you personally if you are just grinding 24/7. Honestly, it seems like that was just yesterday. Like the end of 2019 is obviously what you're talking about. It has been about 3.5 years now, which is crazy. So, from that period of time to now, what do you feel are the biggest lessons that you learned about yourself, about growing businesses, and about just how you want to grow your businesses moving forward?
Yeah, great question. So the first is just more how to be a leader. I make the analogy that at least to my perception, people look at Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk as a-holes, like more people than not. But I think the thing that most entrepreneurs struggle with is that dichotomy of leadership where if you're too nice and you're their friend, they won't respect you. But at the same time, if you're
Mhm.
too much of an a-hole, people leave and you have a lot of churn. So I think I really learned just from hiring a lot, having people leave, et cetera, figuring out, okay, here's the best way to push people. And also understanding that the business only goes as far as you hire. And that really didn't make sense to me at the time because I'm just like, yeah, like he's cheaper. Great. He'll do it for cheaper. That's fine. But you end up spending all this time and energy trying to get someone from a C to an A who's never going to get there versus you pay an extra $5,000 a month or whatever the number is to get a real leader, to get someone who can push the business. So moving forward, anything I do, I'll build out the team. I won't be the CEO. I'll build it from the ground up. It's very important who you hire. And an example is we had a guy I brought in, our revenue dropped by 50%, fired him, brought in another guy, and he increased it. He got it back to the main level and then has increased it by another 50%. and the culture is completely different, no complaints. So I think that's the biggest thing. And then recently I've had some talks with some billionaires and people who've sold for 9 figures. And for anyone listening, I think the key to the game that I've seen to get the biggest valuations, the biggest companies, easiest way to scale is something that has very little fulfillment. So all my companies right now have pretty extensive fulfillment besides one. And they also are post-based. People are a little more skeptical, a little more sketchy, a little more like, oh, that's scammy. So whatever I do next, I want to make sure it has a very high ceiling. So it gets valued at 10x, 15x, 20x versus like InfoSpace is 2 to 4x. And then the second thing is making sure that the fulfillment is very easy or there's very little. And I could give you 2 examples of 2 guys who sold for $1 billion in like less than 2 years with that type of model. But that's the key that I've seen, because if the fulfillment is too intensive, at some point it does break no matter how big the clients are, because there's just so much to do. And that's what makes it hard, is it's hard to keep it level with the customer service and support and just satisfaction. But that's why you see tech companies, for example, they go to 10x multiple, because if I use Zapier or Uber, I get the same experience every time. So it's hard to get pissed off, and any kind of person can do it. I think the question in a funny way is, can the dumbest person on earth get the same results or use this? And if they can, then you have something really powerful and something that can really scale. Because in the info space, that's the issue, right? Is you get George, John, and Sally. One's a 1, one's a 5, John is a 10, and he's happy, and Jill and Sally are not. They're a 5 and a 1. And that's the hard part, because that's the reality. At the end of the day, the person does make the difference a little bit in a done with you.
No, you're absolutely right there. And before I shifted primarily to coaching, I still do agency work, but that's, a smaller piece of the business. It was very intensive on fulfillment. And now obviously coaching is less intensive, but it's still you. It still is something that you have to focus on. So are you saying you believe the better industries, at least for you, are more SaaS, tech, maybe product based? Or do you have some other thoughts of maybe directions that you want to go?
Yeah, those are the ones that stick out right away, because they're notorious for recurring revenue and they're easy to fulfill. Because once you use the software,
For sure.
if you're paying for it, it's pretty easy, right? The same thing every month. The 2 biggest guys who sold, one was Weedmaps. So think of Yelp, but for weed. So it created his own ecosystem where there's really nothing to do. People would go there to find the best weed in the best store. And then what he would do is have the stores pay him to be ranked high. And that's how he made his money. And he didn't have to really do anything. The other guy sold Byte, which was a competitor to Invisalign, and a little bit more fulfillment. But again, they put the braces on, and then that's probably it. And then they probably had some type of recurring with like dental appointments or whatever. And he was just better at marketing. So I'm not necessarily saying that, but I do think you'll be hard pressed to find services that could scale to, depending on your goal, 9 or 10 figures. So one example of someone who is doing it is like Gary Vaynerchuk. I believe his media company does about 300 million a year, but they have massive clients, so these clients are paying 1 to 3, maybe $5 million. These aren't little business owners who make 10K a month. So you can get there for sure. I think if it's a high enough level client, like enterprise client, but if not, and it's more of a small business owner type stuff, I do think you have to find something where you can keep the playing field level. And the way you do that is you just create something that an idiot can use, which, to your point, a lot of times tech fits that bill. A product could fit that bill. But so I don't know what I'm going to do next, but obviously I think you're on the right track with your comment.
Yeah, very interesting. I guarantee you I could keep talking to you for a long time and learn so much, but thank you so much for coming on with me today. So if you had to leave everybody with one final piece of advice, one tip, something that you feel like would make an impact, whatever it is, sales, marketing, just life in general, being a business owner, what would you say?
There's probably 2 things. I get questions a lot of, what do I need to do to start my business, or what's the best way to start, or, what do I do? And really the 2 things that I wish I had done differently that would have made my life a lot easier and saved me a lot of heartache and trial is just one, don't overcomplicate what a business is. All a business is, you create something and you sell it. And I remember I walked into a Subway 5 years ago and I was so perplexed. How do they get customers? And like, how do they get, they just have a location, they make damn sandwiches, people walk in, they figure out ways to get them to walk in, they sell it, right? So whatever you're selling, don't overcomplicate, start having conversations with people. And then number 2 is that if you really truly don't know, is that the opportunity costs you lose trying to Google and YouTube and not hire someone, I just have never seen it work out. It just never works out because for 2 years, I wouldn't spend $5,000 and I made 2,000. And then I finally spend $5,000, I make $1 million. And so when you're broke, it feels massive, right? Like it feels like this huge thing. I remember sweating and my hands were all clammy but I'm so glad I did it because you really, more times than not, your life can't get much worse. If you're already broke, if you're already struggling, the worst thing that can happen is you just continue to struggle. And while that's not the goal, you got to go backwards. Usually you take a step forwards, which means you have to invest money. You might have to use a credit card. You might have to go back home and live with your mom. And I think if you can just put that aside and not worry about what other people say, you can get to where you want to go. So it's really those two things. I know it may sound generic, but if someone had come to me and just told me that when I was like 22, 23, I'd be worth even more than what I did waiting. Because I didn't really start making money until I was 25 because I was so arrogant and egotistical to think that I could figure this out on my own. And I overcomplicated it. Like all I had to do is raise my price to start messing with people. And I thought it was this super complex formula that I had to come up with. And so those would be the two pieces of advice.
Yeah, awesome. Amazing. Thank you so much. If people want to learn more about you, more about Elite CEOs or any of your other businesses, where can they go to find you?
So just either go to YouTube. I'm just trying to put out quality content on YouTube and grow it. So that would be the biggest thank you guys could do. And then obviously you can go to eliteCEOs.com if you want to see more about our consulting services, but those two places would be great.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been great, everybody. I hope to hear you back on the next one.